Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of the Wisdom Circle. We're here with myself, Tony Ponturo, my good friend Ray Warren, and we're doing something a little different this episode. You'll see Carolyne Savini on the screen. We're not going to ask her to speak yet because we got to do our little back and forth Ray and Tony banter, but we want her to sort of listen. And I should say a little bit, so all of a sudden it's just like a face on the screen. Carolyne Savini has been an executive recruiter for over 15 years. She's now developed her own company to executive coach. And we're going to talk a lot about actually what is your it factor? How do you develop an it factor? You may say, well, what's an it factor? Well, stay tuned and we'll talk a little bit about it because, you know, there's a lot of people with resumes that look similar. Everyone's gone to good schools, good background. But what's that difference? What's that difference maker that gets that person the job, gets that person promotion? We're going to talk about it. One of the things that's interesting that we've been reading about, and you know, if you follow the episodes, you saw we talked about the Gen Z, and this staggered Ray and I. I mean, I'll ask Ray to respond a little bit because I know he doesn't have Gen Zs, but he's had 3 children go through. I guess they're millennials now. But 25% of Gen Zs now, when they interview for a job, actually have a parent with them, which my jaw drops when I hear that. Ray, what's your reaction to that?
You know, it hit me hard in terms of, you know, the way I always told my 3 that, hey, I'm here. I have a Rolodex or contacts in my phone. Happy to help, but, you know, good luck to you. And, you know, they've all done their own thing, loving what they do. So I was stunned but not surprised, really, because this overparenting seems to be accelerating. And then my question really was more about the parents who go. Not so much the kids who ask. Kids will ask anything, and they're the best negotiators in the world. Nobody can, you know, my 5-year-old grandson, Emmett, boy, that's a battle my son Gregory has to deal with. And they use timers and they do other things because the job of every parent is to raise a child who can live without his parents. And I don't see how that makes any sense at all. But again, I really question the parents who, I don't know, is the Gen Z asking, or because I have experience of mothers doing reports for their kids. So it's stunning on both sides. And again, to the interviewer who might actually let the parent in the room, I don't know if they're sitting in the waiting room or if they're actually in the chair next to the child interviewing. And that would not be helpful in my recruitment world.
Yeah, and we'll ask Carolyne to respond in a little bit here. So on that particular topic, because, you know, you got to make mistakes. That's how you learn. And if you're basically trying to hold someone up so they can't make a mistake, or you're speaking for them in an interview, it just, I don't know what you're teaching. And maybe, you know, you can reach us on the wisdomcircle.com. So if there's a Gen Z out there watching or listening and who's maybe done this, and explain to us why this is an effective approach, we'd be happy to listen. The other thing, just real quickly, it'll show my interesting TV habits. And to be honest, I started this just to say, well, look, I'll watch the first episode. I was sort of curious. On Netflix, there's a show called American Sweethearts, which is about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And it is actually very interesting. There's a lot of leadership sort of skills and information in there. And a quick aside is one of the cheerleaders who's been on her 4th year, they follow her. They follow quite a few of the young women. There's 36 for those counting Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And they start with hundreds and hundreds of people audition. But this woman wanted to be a captain or co-captain. They have 8 captain and co-captains because there's 4 different groups. And she didn't make it because she didn't have the leadership it factor according to the head of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. that people didn't want to follow her. People didn't want to listen to her. She didn't like to sort of pal with the other girls, if you will. So it's sort of interesting. And she decided that she couldn't be a coach or a captain, then she would not come back for the fifth year. She would not audition for the fifth year. So it's sort of interesting for those that, may be curious. Ray, are you curious?
First of all, no, I'm not going to say that out loud. I'll just start with I'm a really big New York Giants football fan, and because I don't want to turn off anyone who might not live here. I'm curious about the title of the show because the show you're describing does not sound like, and it almost sounds like ick factor a little bit, like America's Sweethearts. Yeah, okay, but then it sounds like an interesting show to me. And I don't think I would have turned it on. I mean, I never saw it even come up on Netflix. I know, you had spousal approval to watch. But American Sweethearts just sounds odd. And so I don't know. The title is making me curious. Like,
well, okay. Sort of like, Dallas Cowboys in their mind or the American.
I get it. I know. But we've both been in this business a long time. I mean, I know you want to attract an audience. And I know the Dallas Cowboys wear short pants and tight shirts and boots and all that stuff. But if you're going to do a kind of a show about the reality of being a cheerleader, I don't know. It's whatever.
Well, I'm not, there's no benefit for me pushing it, but I found there was a lot of
I'm interested now.
Interaction with people, dealing with your peers, communicating to your bosses.
I'm sure. Competitive environment.
You get that. It was interesting. A lot about intelligence.
I bet.
All right. So we've
got spousal approval yet. I'm working on spousal approval. I just got spousal approval on a movie called Blackberry, which is apparently pretty good. So we watch a lot of TV together.
Well, I think it wasn't so much I was asking for approval as that I was accommodating my wife to watch the first episode, and then we both surprisingly got hooked. So you never know. You never know what's going to hook you. So poor Carolyne's had to listen to all this, and all of you sitting there. So Carolyne and I have known each other for quite a long time. I never, I was at Anheuser-Busch for 26 years, so I never used an executive recruiter. And I always sort of, when an executive recruiter would call, I would say, well, I'm not interested for whatever reason, mainly because they didn't really understand my role. And so they would come to me with a job about 3 levels down. And I said, well, do you really know what I do? And they went, well, not really, but, Ray Warren recommended I talk to you, so using that as just an example, obviously. Then they would say, well, is there anyone on your team we should talk to? I said, why would I give you someone on my team that, not that you ever did this, Carolyne, but, and if I did give you someone on my team, it'd be someone I'm probably not that high on, and why would, you want to accept that? But a very important part of probably all businesses and understanding what a company's looking for, and with all the applicants, how do you weed through that? So Carolyne's lived that life a long time. She's now, expanded into this executive coaching, as you'll hear from her. And rather than me keep talking, Carolyne, welcome to the Wisdom Circle, and tell us a little bit about yourself that I haven't already confused people with.
Well, what wasn't confusing to me at all. But thanks, guys. Thanks, Tony and Ray, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Carolyne Savini, and I spent, the funny thing is, Tony, we've known each other long enough that my tenure has exceeded. So I spent actually more like 18 years as an executive recruiter at search firms first, 2 different search firms to the sports and entertainment industry, and then segued in-house to Activision Blizzard. And I equated to being like, if I was a lawyer, it was like working at a law firm my entire career. And then I went in-house to do the same practice, the same type of work, just doing it inside. And the beauty of being in Activision Blizzard for me was I got exposed to, when you're working on the outside, you come in and out, and it's pretty transactional for the most part in the the activity of it. Relationships are a different thing. But once I was inside at Activision Blizzard, I had these I lived with these stakeholders. I worked with them all. And so I got exposed to the broader executive talent management suite, meaning succession planning and how are we preparing our leaders on our succession plan for elevation into the roles that they're on the plan for. And all these other things that I won't bore you with the details, but this is sort of the inflection point for me of how I went from being an executive recruiter to getting into executive coaching. Activision put me through an executive coach training program, and I spent time there and discovered, frankly, that I'm really, really passionate about executive coaching. It's kind of like, Tony, you might appreciate this for your tenure at Anheuser-Busch. It was like I would get hired by clients when I was on the outside to plug a hole, find a new leader, fill this position. And a lot of times those positions would become open for reasons beyond what the organization might have thought. Like, they hadn't properly planned for the attrition, or they got the person in the role got recruited away, or what have you. And it's almost like fixing the symptom and not curing the disease is how it's sort of the way I like to think about it. So to me, executive coaching, leadership development is like really getting under the hood and fixing the whole, curing the disease as opposed to just taking care of a symptom.
Right. And I think we sort of stole this it factor from you as we were visiting you to come speak on the show.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what is the it factor to you?
Yeah. Well, the great thing is when I was in executive recruiting, we would present people sometimes to clients and talk about, and even clients, it would resonate where like, oh, this person's got it. Or a candidate might interview for a job and feedback might be, no, they're not it, or they don't have it. And as a recruiter, it was more like a sense of what does it even mean? And it's when I got into executive coaching that I really started to look under the hood and become more attuned to the nuances of what is the it factor. And I frankly, I like to call it executive presence. It's how someone shows up and the experience that people have of that person. And there's ways to name it and define it.
And Ray, I know you have some opinions about this. Why don't you interject here?
Yeah, no, from everything Carolyne has said so far, I find it interesting how that word it can be, doesn't have it, has it, and then it, right? So you got it in quotes, the it factor, then you have they don't have it, he has it. But so there's a difference, I suppose, between, he doesn't have it, which means he's just not right for the role. Might have the it factor, but not right for the role, which would also be a reason not to hire someone. You don't hire everyone just because they have the it factor. That would be awesome, but it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I think that was interesting, Carolyne. I have to say that I never thought of it in those ways. And then, I want to talk a little bit more about developing it factor and the difference between art and science, really.
Yeah.
Right? Data, steps, do this, and you've got the it factor. And does that measure up to someone who does this, and then just have a sparkle or something that comes across that maybe can't be taught? I mean, that's what we were in just a little contact earlier to this show. It came up. I just find it fascinating. Really do. Really cool.
Carolyne, what's interesting, and the segues a little bit as well into the executive coaching is and I'm gonna not try to be sexist, but I'm gonna say most men, a lot of men, I think have trouble thinking that they need a coach, right? It's almost like a sign of weakness, rather than and their buddies will say, "Oh, you need a coach," why you get advice from someone sort of third party, when in fact, in my opinion, it actually is a form of strength where you realize you can maybe keep developing yourself and your skills and making you a better executive. So you're obviously the best person to comment on that. So
Yeah.
how do you convince someone first that says, well, I don't need a coach? I'm already the smartest person in the room. So what are you going to do for me?
Well, I would to that very point, I'd say the first thing is I would never want to work with someone who doesn't feel like they want it. Now, if an organization is providing it and hiring a coach for the individual, I have a role in supporting that person and getting excited about the possibility of working with a coach. Interestingly, I won't divulge the confidence, but someone shared with me who works with a one of the definitely top 5, possibly top 3. I'm not sure exactly where they fall on the most valuable sports franchises in the world. So one professional sports franchise, definitely top 5, probably top 3, potentially even the number 1. The owner of that organization provides all of their business leaders executive coaches. And what was shared with me with a friend who works for that organization was the philosophy is you have really big jobs and you have lives outside of this job. And I want to make sure you have every resource and support structure and system for you to show up how I need you to in your day job. And however this ends up supporting you personally, great, but use it how you will. And there's a reason why that organization is one of the most valuable franchises in the world. And when you have an owner that has that kind of mentality and philosophy, it promotes it as a positive, number one, that is executive coaching. And it is a support structure. And no, not everybody needs it. But there is an opportunity to use it. And like even just segueing into the topic of the it factor, the beauty of working with a coach, if one goes into it willingly, is the coach really, part of the role is to support the individual in seeing things they don't see for themselves. So like even just circling it back to the conversation of what is the it factor, I call it executive presence because it's how someone shows up. And it's really subtle nuances, but at a high level, I follow the Bates model of executive presence, which is at a high level, character, substance, and style. And job descriptions, even, they will identify experience traits, skill sets, and we'll talk about certain character traits. And it's all nuanced and it's all probably a little bit subjective to the eye of the beholder. And yet it is something that you can track and it's something that you can measure. And for someone that's not understanding, well, I've got all the experience. Why am I not getting the jobs? What am I missing? It's probably something underneath the hood in the area of the character, substance, or style components of how that person's showing up, whether it's in an interview or if they're getting referenced on the back end by people that work with them and have experienced that individual's leadership or how they operate in certain situations. It can look anything like assertiveness or composure or confidence or humility or restraint. It's comprised of a lot of different factors that number one, a job description isn't going to specifically name. What is your degree of humility? What is your degree of confidence? But those are all the things that you guys know as from people that you've managed and even how you've shown up into the boards or the owners or whoever you've reported to. There are these things that most of the time we don't put our finger on, but we sense. And I'm really excited in the concept of executive presence of supporting people and naming these things and where do they fall on the spectrum of it all.
Now, that's really interesting. It's funny because you said, that character, substance, style, which, I wrote down again. I'd written it down another time, but I feel like I'm on the debate stage taking notes. Not to talk about that. But you said it's not going to be in a job description, which is 100% correct. It's also not going to be on a resume.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so there's this giant part of getting the right job in the right place for the right reason and all those things. And it's really unspoken in the recruiting process.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, how could you? I always felt, so, Tony and I have lots of fun talking to each other all the time. So I'm going to be as gentle as I can. He's a beer guy, right? They're tough. I always thought a guy who was vulnerable, who showed it, was a leader. I also felt that the guys who were smart enough to take a coach were like, all right, that's really cool. I would not, but I could see it in that, and I don't, this is really about Anheuser-Busch, Tony, and the whole beer thing. So it's not about you. No, it's not. I don't think it's you. You're a very sensitive guy. But I always thought, and I don't know, Tony, when we were back in the days of maybe needing a coach, I don't ever remember that business even existing back in the 80s, say. It might have existed at higher level. I didn't know where nobody ever called me and said, hey, we have an executive coach. I'm not going to meet with him. I would have run just because you always want to be the best person you can be every day when you roll out of bed. How can I be better today? So, yeah, just interesting that it's never spoken. To me, was the thing. It's not in job descriptions. It's not in resumes. And yet character, substance, style. It's pretty big.
Well, and you sort of earn it. Ray and I both did a lot of negotiating in the business world on opposite sides of the desk. I was always, quote, a buyer, if you will, and Ray was a seller. But sometimes, and so particularly in New York, you earn a reputation, and sometimes you can get by with something because of the reputation. And then they say a younger person, a less experienced person, tries to bring some of the same, I'll call it bravado, and it's not accepted. I heard from a lot of people saying, Tony, you've earned the right to say that, but your lieutenant hasn't yet in their mind. So it's sort of about earning your stripes and earning your own reputation, which is sort of interesting. Sort of Ray triggered a quick story, which I always have to have a few AB stories just to appease myself. Is when I was named head of media and sports marketing at Anheuser-Busch, I was 39. And the way August Busch would really get to know you is you would go on a quail hunt. And, so he was like, okay, go get Bob Wright, who at the time was CEO of NBC, and Dick Ebersol, who was head of sports. And then GE, and who owned NBC at the time, we had a mutual board member. And so now we would descend on 1,000 acres of land in probably
Nothing macho about that.
Nothing that macho about it. And I was like,
bunch of guys with guns.
And on horseback. Yeah,
of course. With the leathers, I can see it.
But on the way back, so for 3 hours in the afternoon, dinner 3 hours in the morning, August is drilling these five folks at NBC about everything you can imagine. So we're coming back, and he said, Ponturo, I want to tell you something. I said, what? He goes, I thought you were too nice of a guy, right? And that these networks and these leagues were going to run all over you, and you've got all this money you're spending, but they told me you get the same kind of deals, if not better, than a lot of people, but you do it in your way, in your style, right? And so it was actually obviously a vote of confidence, but also told me, be yourself. But I always kid a little bit, but I used to be a nice guy, and so I had to become a little bit of a tougher guy, because that was the finger in the chest, which is, don't let these people push you around. Anyway, it's a bit of a digress, but it's all sort of interesting how you're establishing your presence, your executive presence. Who are you? How do you earn your respect? And you just can't, because then when I left, and as you mentioned, some people started to say, they started bossing people around like they had the 25 years at AB. It's like, no, you haven't earned that. And I think, I put words in Ray's mouth. I remember some of the salespeople, as Ray was one. It's like, you You haven't earned that right to talk to me that way yet. You know? But
Yeah, well, it's all true. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, there was a point where Tony and I were doing an upfront negotiation. I was at ABC, and he had a boss who didn't think Tony had gotten a good enough price, and he did, because there were people who just ground you to just death until 3 a.m, and you would tell them, okay, so I'm now running out of inventory on the 3 nights you want to buy. You could keep telling me the market's lower, but I'm telling you, I'm running out of spots to sell you. And then there was Tony, who would say, look, here's what I need. I don't want to be embarrassed. I want to get the best deal you're giving anybody, and, we'll walk away. And there was always a little money on the table for both sides, which was always the case. But some guys, you got to tell them, no, there's no money left on the table. You can't let me. And they felt, oh, yeah, I got them. They never got us. We were counting the house. We knew how much money was out there. We knew how many breeding plants. Nobody ever got it. But, you tell them that. So Tony's boss calls for a meeting, and he wants to come in and get a few cents off the deal. And I go to my boss's boss, and I'm like, I've cut this deal with Tony, because I was in management at that point. And I'm like, Saul's going to come in, with, 42 reasons why, and we can't give him a penny. And we had the meeting. Out comes the 8.5 by 11 with yes, best deal you're going to get. And that speaks to not really the Tony Ray relationship, the Tony negotiating style, which got the best deals without having to kill people or make them feel bad about their job, etc. That's the one thing I always, there's a lot of things I respect about Tony, but that's one.
that's nice. And that had a great story. I remember it well. So Carolyne, we should let you interject here a little bit and take the lead, but one more question, which is sort of two-pronged. One is how do you, there's some observation of myself in sports with teams particularly that you sort of okay, we're going to move someone, I'm making this up a little bit, we're going to move someone from the Minnesota Twins to the Cincinnati Reds, and then their job's open, and then we're going to fill that in, and it's sort of this circle. And someone we both know well said to me once, no one can be president of a team unless they started in the ticket office of the team, which I thought was the most ludicrous thing I ever heard. And you know what I'm talking about. It's like, well, what about this person who was a marketer? What about this person? Why do you have to start in the ticket office? I mean, it's a very narrow thinking. So my real point is, how do you get any industry? Because you're not just going to work in sports, although I'm sure a lot of it will be, to not be so narrow, particularly where the world is going today. You really want broad thinkers, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'll comment actually first on sort of how the opinion of that person, and that is one opinion, and it's also how that individual sees the world. That right. If you hadn't sat in every seat in the organization or all the revenue driving seats in an organization, then one cannot successfully lead a sports organization, a sports team, for instance. And that was that person's viewpoint, and it doesn't make them right or wrong. It's just a viewpoint. And that's actually the first thing that I would call out to both people hiring, owners, leaders, board members, whoever's hiring whatever leadership role, whether it's the CEO or a director or an entry-level person. It is, what is the experience is one thing, but where is it that we're looking to go, and what does it take for someone to come in and lead us to that point? What do we really need for that? And my observation from where I sit now, looking back on my career, and I was in it, I did that too. Like, all right, well, our client says that they want a revenue driver CEO. So therefore, this is the profile of the person that we want, of the candidates we want to put forward. And what it didn't consider, that mentality does not make room for, is, well, where are we looking to go, and what are the leadership traits or characteristics that we need that someone will need for all the obstacles that they will face. Because a CEO of an organization or a president of an organization is not the one doing all the things. They're the ones leading the people who are doing all the things. And the role of that person is really to sort of set the vision or the strategy, whether it's a privately held organization alongside of the owner, or a publicly traded company alongside of the in consult with the board or approval by the board. But it is like, what is it that we are trying to achieve, and what do we need in order to achieve it? And how am I going to, as a leader, rally all the troops and support all the people? And how do I want to show up as a leader in order to do that? So it's more expanding the thinking of like, what is the leader that we need? Because I have seen so many organizations fail when they get really myopic on whether it's a person or a personality or a pedigree of experience.
Mhm.
That's what we need, and plug and play. And this is the answer to all of our problems. But it's so narrowly focused on what has been and not necessarily what will be. And if I can comment on one other thing that I think both of you are kind of bringing up, specifically about Tony, as you like Ray, as you talked about Tony, and Tony, as you talked about your experiences about your, what I would paraphrase as like your brand is my experience of you is, you know who you are, and you know why, who you want to be and how you want to show up. And so like circling all of that back to the it factor and executive presence, it gets out of whack. And when somebody doesn't have the it factor, my experience is they're trying to be something that they're not. And it's like being really grounded in oneself.
Yep.
And then you can challenge yourself on, well, how do I elevate the different aspects of my character, or how do I elevate the different aspects of how I show up and what my style is? And that can be supported and developed. But it has to start with being really grounded in knowing who you are and why, like how you want to show up as a person.
So when, because I would say that to me there might be people, and I don't exactly know the realm or the age groups of people who need. Well, maybe everybody needs an executive coach, but like some people are unformed at some point and they don't know who they are, and then as they go through the world of business, they start to understand that. So, how does that work? And I want to have you ask us some questions, because typically we ask people to prepare questions and then we do one or maybe two. So that's my last question, is how do you kind of gradate, tier coaching to different levels? Is there a minimum age, a maximum age, or like just it's all about the position and the candidate? When does it, where does it kick in?
Yeah. Well, so for me personally, I target working with people that are already in progress in their career. So I don't, I'm not the coach for entry level. There are coaches out there that can support those people. But it's generally like two aspects. So the people that feel like they're starting to hit a wall, like how do I break through? What's next for me? Once someone's been in there, and somebody can be in their career for 3 years, for 5 years, or for 20 years and be like, have that experience. And then also, so then the other group is those that are at the top and want the support to continue to challenge themselves, maybe newly at the top, new CEOs, new leaders of small, mid-size, and larger organizations. How do I continue to challenge myself? And I want support to help me as I face all these situations that I expect I will start to face. Okay. So that's sort of for me where I the types of people that I work with.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Carolyne, ask Ray a question.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about executive presence, and it's all tied into leadership and the it factor, we could talk about you, and like, so I'm curious about you, and also like where you feel like you honed it. So what your models for yourself, whether it's mentors, bosses, other leaders, or if you actually resonate with like someone that may have been like a coach to you. So like, who were they? How'd you develop yourself?
Yeah. Well, interesting question. I had some great, I guess I'd use the word bosses along the way, who just were forgiving and down to earth. Well, I made a mistake once, and my boss at the time said, "There's nothing I can say that will make you feel any worse than you're going to make yourself feel. So, like, just don't do that again." And like, breath of fresh air. I had a gentleman in a very early part of my career before I got into the business who was a Seventh Day Adventist running a restaurant, and I was behind the grill. And this guy was like, I mean, he brought it. And so his spirit, his fire, but he was down to earth too. You could sit and have a meal with him. So it's just being real. I think for me, it was just never lose sight of who you are. And I think to your point, exactly, you said it earlier. I just, I've always known that, the way you get to know people is not by going to the highest person you can get to. It's like start. There's a great story about JFK talking about putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And he said it on a big conference, and he was walking through NASA headquarters, and he saw a gentleman who was cleaning the floor. And he says, "So, tell me, what else do you do? What else is part of your job?" He goes, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." That's
Yeah.
a lead.
Yeah, that sounds purpose driven to me.
Well, and I think if I can interject here, if they hit on his short order cook, I think
I didn't say short order. I said it was behind the grill, but it was a pancake house.
there's a
It's an IHOP.
pancake house.
We
Yeah.
can be honest.
No, but I think I've heard
Damn
you
good
talk
one.
a lot about it. And I worked this summer in college at a cafeteria of Exxon's, like, dining room, and filling the coffee wagon, for the people that would go out, and where I'm going with all this is that I think, for myself and everything I've heard from Ray, is sort of understanding all levels of people and classes and ethnicities is a big part of relating to people in the workplace. I think some people who get a little bit too pure in their background don't really, maybe, I'm not going to say they think they're better than some of these people, but I don't think they relate to them as well. And I've learned so much about interfacing with the cook in the cafeteria, the person that washed the dishes, the women that helped support the coffee wagons. I can relate to more of those things of what you taught me, as I've heard Ray talk about his time at the pancake house. So again, in my opinion, all experience is experience. It builds a foundation of who you are. And my wish, bringing it back to executive recruiting and even coaching, is, I'll be controversial in a way. I think some executive recruiters need to be executive coached, and understand what they need to do in today's world, and to get people with different minds and focus, and how do you look at things. But if everything is just, very narrow and linear, you're gonna get the same person, feeding the whole industry. So, I'll end with that. Carolyne, real quick, and we'll let you have one more question as we try to keep ourselves on time. But I also want you to, we're not above shameless plugs. So I think as we wrap up in the next 5 minutes here, you should say what your company is, and if you want to, and if you want to be reached, because people will be listening, and maybe they want to reach out, but that's totally up to you. But I'm just giving you that forum if you want to.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. The name of my firm is The Catalyst Executive, and it's an executive coaching and leadership development firm. And we are committed to bringing more exceptional leadership into the world. Period. The end. Because Lord knows, from government leaders to the leader of the pancake house. The world needs more exceptional leadership.
Well, and we will get political here, and I watched it on a red eye coming back from LA last night, which was, on a repeat. Is the whole debate really came down to who had executive presence. It really had nothing to do with policies or who was going to do what with the country or whatever. It really came down to, in my opinion, is who exuded least confidence and who did. And so now we've got this conversation going on. It really was all about presence. It really wasn't about policy. Again, in my opinion.
And that's it. What the it factor creates, executive presence establishes inherent trust in an individual. So I'd probably maintain for you, Tony, because we've talked about you specifically today, that people trusted you. And Ray, I'm sure the same goes for you. And it's how you showed up. Because the final question that I actually have for both of you, Ray, you had asked me earlier, like how does someone get paraphrasing, but it's like, not everybody knows who they are, or really grounded in who they are, and how does one do that? And the process that I support people through in that is by taking them to the end. Like, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered by? Go dark for a moment, but at your eulogy, people are eulogizing you. They're not going to be talking about how much money you had in the bank or how many properties you owned. So what do you want them to be talking about and remembering you for? So that's actually the question I'll leave to ask to both of you as we wrap up. What do you see as your legacies?
My tombstone should say he always woke up trying to be a better person, and he certainly was a good person.
Yeah, I think the same. To me, it was about being, I wanted people to say he's honest and truthful. We can trust him. And
Tony would need 2 tombstones because it would be a lot of words.
Yeah, I even put it into a single soundbite. I always thought Ray was more verbose, but maybe it's me.
Sure. When you had a budget and I was selling to you, I would agree.
You just humored me.
No, you don't.
No, I mean, I think that's, what I'm most surprised of, and I'd want this to come out the right way, and Ray is just retired, so there's sort of a delay.
Rookie season.
Yeah, rookie season. But is that younger people will come up and say, "I've heard about you and your career," and and it's sort of nice to hear, because if you were, not that kind of person, so you hope you spread the word and you hope you're educating people. And I think, in conclusion, for this podcast, when Ray and I talked about doing this podcast for about 6 months to figure out if there was value, what we were really trying to do was give back, and express ourselves to I don't think we put an age requirement on it, but I think we thought younger people, particularly in the age of remote working, could maybe have a place to say, okay, maybe I can learn a little bit from these 2 chuckleheads. And so it was about sort of giving back and sharing, and the only way anyone's going to really listen to you is if there's some sense of trust and authenticity. That would be my one word soundbite: authenticity. But Ray,
and a third person. I mean, we felt like 2 guys talking to each other. We needed that third person who's in that world of work and growth.
Yes,
kind of round out the circle. Otherwise, it was just going to be banter, and we don't need another banter podcast.
No. So, Carolyne, we thank you. We know you're a busy person. We got to build this new company. You've been a good friend for many years. I respect you. I think you and Ray had some good email banter, so there was a good interaction. But most importantly, we hope our audience has learned a little bit, and we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
It was great.
All right.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Happy to come back again if you ever want to invite me back.
We hope to be around.
Part two.
Absolutely. We got lots more to
Part
talk
two.
about. Great.
All right. See
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. See you next
See ya.
time.